Welcome back to The Lead. I'm Shahan Ramkisoon. Our coverage continues on the President's Economic Recovery Plan announced a short while ago in Parliament. Let's get more reaction. Lindsay Detlinger is there. Lindsay?
Thank you, Shahan. With me, the ACDP's Wayne Thring. Mr. Thring, we'll just get straight to it. Your thoughts on what the President had to say this afternoon?
Well, I think that from the position of the ACDP, much of it is hopefully not going to be wishful thinking, but we do think that it is actually wishful thinking. And the reason why we say that is because over the years, government has put forward many positive plans which we have supported. However, in terms of the implementation, we have not seen any implementation in terms of those plans. One of the plans, for example, that government has positive, that the ACDP supports, is a plan of beneficiation. Beneficiation essentially, instead of exporting our raw materials, we add value to our raw materials. But South Africa currently has a trade deficit, for example, one of our largest BRIC partners, which is China. We export all of our raw materials, and on the manufacturing side, we are importing value-added products from China. So, and there are other partners, obviously, trade partners, where we have these trade deficits. So from the side of the ACDP, we are saying, when we talk about beneficiation, when we talk about localization, let's actually implement the particular policies that we have. Unfortunately, we believe that because of crime and because of corruption within government departments, we have not seen there are protagonists, those who are actually opposite or oppose those particular policies, and they stand in the way of positive policies, and they stand in the way of South Africans who actually want to see unemployment on its back and unemployment decreasing.
800,000 jobs, thousands of jobs for young teaching assistants, for young people. Does that go far enough for you this afternoon?
Absolutely not. 800,000 jobs as compared to 2.2 million jobs that have been lost from March to date. 800,000 jobs as compared to the millions of South Africans that are currently unemployed. So we have in excess of 12 million South Africans currently unemployed. 800,000 jobs as compared to the expanded definition of unemployment. 42% of South Africans unemployed and growing. Within the tourism industry, within your restaurant, some 16,000 restaurants, 50% of those are going to be lost. 800,000 jobs are expected to be lost in the hospitality industry. So the 800,000 as compared to the millions of jobs that are currently lost pales in comparison. So certainly more has to be done. Government has initiated one of the hardest lockdowns in the world, and as a result, our economy has been decimated, and this is as a result, the blame for this must lie at the door of the ruling party.
Had government maybe not instituted such a hard lockdown, the President saying this afternoon the situation could have been far worse. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think that we also have to compare that with other countries. For example, within the United States, there are some states that did not implement hard lockdowns. They looked at hygiene protocols, health protocols, and implemented those, but not hard lockdowns. Let's look at Sweden. Sweden did not implement a hard lockdown, and yet the death rate in Sweden compares to that with the United Kingdom, where they've actually had a hard lockdown. Let's take other countries like Madagascar and other countries, for example, in other parts of Africa that did not implement hard lockdowns and yet have lower death rates than we have in South Africa.
But they have very different social circumstances to us.
Understandably, different social circumstances, but South Africa is one of the most industrialized and wealthiest countries countries in Africa of the 54 nation states. So in terms of our health, the health systems that we actually have, South Africa has one of the strongest health systems. Many of our African counterparts come to Africa. Yet, despite that, we've had some of our African counterparts having lower death rates. So I do think, however, that we have to comply in terms of health and hygiene protocols. The coronavirus is a reality. However, we do believe that that the government failed in terms of the economic and turning the economy around during this particular period. Decimated the economy, rather.
That said, your support for this COVID-19 stress grant to be extended for another 3 months?
I think that South Africans can do with every bit of help that they can get. Government has actually placed South Africans in the position that they currently are, and government needs to do whatever they can to actually assist. I have people also knocking on our doors saying that they've been waiting for their UIF and their TERS from March. So we still have those who have not received their benefits from March. And so I think the bottlenecks within the system we have to get rid of those so that people on the ground can see what government is saying being implemented.
Thank you very much. That is Wayne Thring from the ACDP, critical of the hard lockdown, saying they didn't feel that it was necessary for such a severe lockdown and that government has to shoulder some of the blame for the situation the country currently finds itself in. Shahan?
All right, thanks, Lindsay Dentlinger in Cape Town. Let's get some reaction on the President's remarks now. Joining me is the CEO of the Black Business Council, Hanki Matabane. Hanki, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. So what's your takeaway from what the President had to say? Is he saying enough?
Yeah, what we always say in business is risk management. So we have to look at what is the biggest risk that this plan cannot be implemented. As you know, we've had other plans before. And the biggest risk is the capacity of the state to implement effectively and efficiently. So for us, we were happy with, for example, the teams that were announced, for example, the operation of Vulindlela. But the worry is that will that make sure that things get implemented? And what happens if people don't implement? Are we going to see a more serious consequence management where people are going to be held accountable for not delivering what they're supposed to be delivering? And we hope that will be the case because we're in a crisis. When we are in a crisis, we need to behave like we're in a crisis. So the actions that you take have to be crisis management. So what we think will push in at NETLEC, will push for at NETLEC will be the risk management strategy to say, let's make sure that we monitor on a more frequent basis the risks and make sure that then we manage those risks. But as far as the issues are concerned, we were happy that the economic transformation will be at the center of all this. We've always said that for the past 26 years, we have not seen much economic transformation, and we hope that this will also happen. And we have been pushing for the what we call the procurement bill, and we hope, as the President said, it's going to be accelerated. We've made our inputs to the bill, and we hope that the Minister of Finance will actually prioritize it because the President spoke about 40% that will be set aside for women-owned businesses. But you cannot do that with the current legislation of PPFA because it does not allow you to set aside anything. So that can only be done through the fast tracking of the public procurement bill and making sure that that 40% that the President spoke about is included in the bill. Otherwise, if it's not included in the bill, that will never see the light of day. The other issue that we were happy with is the spectrum, the auctioning of the spectrum, and also the allocation of the spectrum to what is called the wireless open access network. But we feel the spectrum allocated to the WAN, as it's called, is not sufficient enough to encourage new entrants into the market, because the intention is to say, let's open the market, reduce the influence of the duopolies in the countries, and get new players to get in. But we feel that the spectrum is not sufficient enough to bring much new entrants and transformation in the space. The other issue we've been engaging with already with the Infrastructure South Africa led by Dr. Ramaphosa is the major infrastructure drive that we've seen with the Gazette that the Minister of Public Works has implemented or has released. Our worry has always been and is still that we should not then think of transformation as a by the way when we implement this major infrastructure drive.
Yeah. So, Hanke, it sounds like you're happy but not happy, because you're happy about things but you're also skeptical about the implementation. Did the President say anything today that will reassure businesses to get back up and running in South Africa and get foreign investors back into this country?
Yes, I think he spoke about the two issues that are very important for for confidence boosting. The issue about crime and corruption. And I think we must commend the NPA. The past few weeks, it has been very, very busy. If we can keep that momentum and make sure that all the state money that has been put aside for service delivery, that's exactly what it's supposed to do. It does not happen in other people's pockets in an inappropriate manner. So that dealing with the crime, if that can be accelerated, will then increase the confidence in the market. And I think he spoke about the National Economic Recovery Council. We've interacted with the Coronavirus Council, and we've seen how swift actions can be taken. If he can keep that momentum, I think a lot of things will happen, because we've seen water was provided for communities that did not have water before, mainly because of the NCC that intervened. So if the Economic Recovery Council can also mainly do exactly what the NCC was doing, hopefully then we'll be able to see actions in the speedy implementation of the plan that we have seen. We are happy with the plan, but the main issue that we have seen in business that makes strategies not to be implemented is the capacity of a company or a capacity of the state. The state has not had enough capacity to implement plans that have been before this one.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Hanki Matabane is the CEO of the Black Business Council. So let's pick up on that and the role of business when it comes to this. The president mentioned the private sector. He mentioned banks and what they should be doing. But can they?
I think one of the big things that we don't focus on enough, Shahan, particularly if government is to reach its target for localization and industrialization, is the fact that South African banks are not really risk averse. And the government needs to speak louder on, forcing banks to come to the party on issues of risk. We've seen, the approach in the world that you need to get away from this rigid neoliberal approach to the economy. It is not dealing with the crisis even before COVID and particularly post-COVID. So first of all, if you are going to be building black local business and you're saying manufacture your PPE here, I mean, one of the things, Shahan, that is actually so scandalous, apart from the fact that we were being overcharged for PPE, that PPE was being manufactured in China, in India, not here in South Africa, where we could have reactivated through CMTs our, textile workers that have lost their jobs. Those small companies could have come to the party to manufacture the PPE for our frontline workers, such as our health workers, our police. Instead, our police is involved in corrupt tenders that are going out to people that actually don't have the capacity to bring the PPE, but are politically connected and subcontract and eventually bring that PPE, and in some senses, substandard PPE from places like China. So when we're talking about localization, we need South African banks to actually put their money where their mouths are. You can't build black business if you don't put money into it, and if the banks are not prepared to take a risk. So banks also need to come out, and opposition parties need to, instead of just bashing the state, because they're very good at that, and of course the state needs to be criticized, but they need to put pressure on the private sector, particularly the banks, because the banks in South Africa reap a lot of benefit from the funds that the government has put in place to shield businesses. We haven't seen your rent holidays as a result of COVID from the banks. I mean, the so-called loans that they gave us on our bonds and so on are actually just different forms of interests that they're charging us. So banks really need to come to the party. The other thing for me that is important, of course, is the question of getting people to be able to be part of public-private partnerships. The private sector on its own cannot do this. The government on its own cannot do this. So when you're talking about SAA, so many people are saying, don't throw good after bad. But if you look at the knock-on effect of all the other other industries around SAA, and you're talking about not leading to further job losses, then it's worth talking about who can be brought on board and what financial resources can actually be harnessed, whether it's through your DBSA, whether it is raising that capital elsewhere. One of the big institutions in the world, the IMF as well as the World Bank, has insisted in this COVID period that monies that are to be given to governments are to be spent on things like health. So the NHI must be on the agenda. The ACDP spokesperson there spoke about South Africa having a great health system. Well, that's only if you're rich and middle class. If you are poor, then the crumbling infrastructure in the Eastern Cape does not compare as the best in the world. So government should actually take a sizable proportion of that money and invest it in primary health care. We are already behind, Shahan, on things like immunizations. We're doing fewer tests. We're not doing HIV treatment the way we did. And one of the biggest fatal comorbidities is diabetes. It's a lifestyle disease. It is tied to poor people and what they eat and what they can afford. So if government is to prepare itself for a pandemic like this in the future, the best way to actually get us there is to invest in proper healthcare infrastructure. The key, of course, is that the state must have the capacity to roll that out. So instead of giving all your money to provincial hospitals, you need to be putting it into district clinics, into primary healthcare clinics. And of course, that is where the tire hits the tar. Yeah. So we really need to get to a progressive take on economic development. This old neoliberal way of doing things that we've done in the last 26 years has made South Africans more poor and the society more unequal. So business need to come to the party, and political opposition parties need to stop coming with the same old neoliberal ideas, because quite frankly, it is not taking us further, and it's certainly not dealing with those who need assistance the most, Shahan.
Yeah. So Vuyo, let's talk about this one thing that we've heard from everyone we've spoken to so far: hope and implementation. Given our track record in South Africa, and given that the BBC even admits that we've been failing for years to get things right when it comes to implementation, how can we trust that this is actually going to work now in this time of need?
You know, one of the proposals at NETLEC was that there be an implementation mechanism that involves other social partners as well. And that's precisely because of the government's bad record or in implementation. Now, one of the things, for me, one of the biggest things that President Cyril Ramaphosa's speech ought to have addressed is why similar initiatives haven't worked before. And that, for me, would begin to, one, make us understand exactly where the government is coming from on each and every issue. Because if you listen to the criticism, let's take Dr. Groenewold's criticism of, the grant, for unemployed and vulnerable people. I mean, there's a reality there. Because if you don't deal with the most vulnerable section of our society, then there is great potential for social unrest. But you simply, just as a human being, you simply can't leave people to die because of hunger or to suffer even more because you are hanging on to the 20 cents that you've got. So those things need to be put out there, and people brought to the party to actually call them out and say, is this what you mean? Is this what you want? Because these are the consequences, will be the consequences of not doing things. And it's with that, I think, in mind, that President Cyril Ramaphosa went ahead and announced an extension by 3 more months of that 350 rands, in spite of what his economic advisory council actually told him, because they then became aware or alive to the fact that there are consequences to doing something like that. So I think there's also another a problem that he has to confront, and that is the performance of his own government. And it's not, broadly speaking, it can't just be confined to building the capacity of the state. No. Remember, if you talk about the auctioning of the spectrum, for example, among the things that actually led to the delay was the Department of Communication taking ICASA to court, which led to several delays. And by the time ICASA was in a position to grapple with the issue, a lot of the councillors had actually reached the end of their terms, and you still had to build new capacity. So you have to also look at how ministers, departments are actually doing their job, and from what vantage point are their solutions and their way of doing things, their solutions coming from, and their way of doing things. So there's a lot more he needs to confront.
I want to itch to come in there. You know, just recently, Shahan, the Eastern Cape government, had tabled a presentation on ICT. And of course, you can't enter this economy if you're not talking about ICT and the fourth industrial revolution. You know what happened, Shahan? It turns out that it's a plagiarized presentation that was taken off the World Wide Web, the Internet of Things. The Premier there, Mr. Mabuyane, had to apologize. They paid over 3 million rand for that presentation, and it goes to the heart of what Vuyo is saying. If you have people who are employed as the advisors of the premiers to create that vision, to implement policy, and you have people stealing presentations of the internet, then it makes it very pointless to say that government must drive any kind of plan, because clearly the people there are not in a position to develop policy. They don't have the vision, they're not qualified, never mind implement it so that it can actually really change the lives of ordinary people.
Yeah.